Can you all hear me?
Yes.
That's all. Thank you for your interest in my work here. I will give you some insight into my work and where it comes from. So we can go inside and I'll give you some little stories, and if you have any questions or any thoughts, I'm open. The two shapes I talked about, I'll point them out here. The shape here is what we call an ovoid, and there are 10,999 variations of that ovoid. And this is a variation of the same ovoid, but instead of it being concave, it's convex. So this is concave on the bottom, and on the bottom of this one is convex. And the U shape here I talked about, those are the two main alphabets. And the red would be called the skeleton of the animal or the form line of the animal. And one rule of thumb is on the bottom of the ovoid, it's usually thinner than the top. But now that I said that, you'll see where it isn't always like that. This space here is called negative. The space around the animal or creature, and the red creature is called the positive. And quite often there are dualities happening. This is the dorsal fin of this killer whale, the eye of the killer whale, the head of the killer whale, the eye, the snout, the mouth, pectoral fin, body, tail flukes, and the boxes that you see here, there was an artist who, when you look at the boxes, they only played with the form line. There was a classic period where they only played with the form line, but this artist introduced a whole new shape within the shape. The black field, the black shape, you'll see it on all sides. That is an addition that is not part of the overall design. And there was this artist who I studied to move into the next level of the art. And so with that black field, then I started to play with this positive area being black, negative area being black, and this negative area on the bottom being white. And there's other things happening. The splits, these are called trinegs because there's 3 points. I call it a three-pointed negative space. And here I was being whimsical. This is the water blowing out of the killer whale. And you see other things happening. This ovoid becomes an eye, and this ovoid here becomes the dimple, or the snout. So when you look at it, it looks like a creature, and I call this Kuganjut. Kuganjut is a supernatural being like a messenger. He gives you news on what's happening or going to happen. And there's a Kuganjut here again. So you see this being a positive, it's like a double positive. It's a pectoral fin, but it's also a Kugelgut. And this shape here, I cut it in half. It's actually a trineg. The idea here was to break the monotony of having two trinegs in the same space. So this part of the trineg is implied. It's hinted. And that comes from our culture. We don't ask directly, we always hint. I really want to ride uptown, or I really want to, do this. And you're supposed to figure out whether you should do that or not. So this is implied. This one here is building off my newfound discovery of being able to go beyond what was already established. So instead of half white and half black, I did it all black. In Haida and Northwest Coast art, there are two main colors, red and black. Many people ask why red and black. Sometimes I say, why not? But red seems to be like a natural, there's a lot of red ochre, for example, and black from the charcoal of the wood. And that's mixed with a pigment, that's mixed with a medium, the salmon eggs. The salmon eggs are mixed, they're smoked and they're chewed and mixed with your saliva, and that becomes the medium. But after contact, we readily accepted the commercial paints. So a lot of these are used, I use commercial paints. This here I call Iliolus, raven fin. The dorsal fin of the killer whale is illustrated, and the raven inside its fin. The raven, and so that's one of the crests of my father's time. And in the supernatural realm of Haida mythology, all animal forms, all bird forms, all mammal forms have human attributes. So when we see them in their world, the supernatural world, in their world, we see them as humans. So when we see them in the natural world, we see them with their cloaks on, with the skin of the killer whale on, the skin of the eagle, and so on. So here we have an eyebrow on the raven beak here, and a human hand. And my favorite creature, Kugelgut. You'll see that I like to, every box, storage box, these boxes were cooking vessels or storage boxes. How they were cooking vessels was they would heat the rocks and immerse it in the water and the fish or seal or whatever it is, and that's how we cooked, using these boxes as a cooking pot. Later on, after contact, we took, now we don't have any boxes, we have refrigerators. But we also have a whimsical name for the refrigerator. We call it Guandawe, which means that's where you put the leftovers. And my uncle pushed the meaning a little further. He said that's where you cool off the food before you throw it away. We can move over here now.
Yeah.
This canvas I call its own building, southeast wind. On Haida we have what is if it's not blowing, it's going to blow. Southeast wind is one of the major winds blowing on Haida, and southeast wind has 10 brothers. That's how many forces of wind that hits Haida. And southeast wind is a supernatural being that lives under the ocean. There's a story of southeast wind blowing for days and days and days. And Raven, our culture hero, heard all the people grumbling about southeast wind blowing too much. So Raven called on his helpers, who will come with me to talk to southeast wind? And he didn't have any volunteers, so he appointed Halibut, and I think only Halibut helped him. So Halibut came along with him, and Raven was paddling his canoe looking for southeast wind. And Halibut, before they took off, all the halibut jumped into the canoe, and some of you who haven't seen halibut, they're quite flat. And they jumped into the canoe and became the canoe floorboard. And so when they finally found southeast wind, the halibut jumped out of the canoe and formed the walkway up to the house of southeast wind. And when Raven knocked on the door, he said, "Are you southeast wind?" And the supernatural being said, "Yes, I am." And the halibut promptly turned around. There were about 10 of them turned around, and they all slapped him on the face. He said, "We're tired of you blowing. Could you stop blowing?" So shortly after that, he stopped blowing his wind. And when you see southeast wind in his world, he's shown us in the form of a killer whale. So here's the killer whale head, the eye, mouth, the trineg. The trineg helps to define the ovoid. You see the trinegs here? They direct the energy of the being. And this U shape here is the dorsal fin. And you'll see it's black. Even though it's positive, it's black. And this U shape here is the tail of southeast wind, of killer whale. And when you see a oval in the dorsal fin, that indicates it's a supernatural whale. On Haida, for those of you who haven't been there, and those who have been there, it is a very supernatural experience. There's so much power, there's so much energy in the landscape, on the water, in the rivers, and so on. There's an amazing amount of energy, and each prominent point, a supernatural being lives under that point. There's another story of Creek Woman. I don't have any illustrations of Creek Woman, but Creek Woman, when Creek Woman owned the fish in the rivers, and so when we go fishing, you ask for permission from the Creek Woman to take some fish. And when in the time of supernatural beings, Creek Woman settled on a very popular trail near this river, and soon found out that people walking on top of her, she lived under the trail, tickled her. So she decided to move to another place on the river. I just love that image.
there
Yes?
a blowhole? A
Blowhole?
lot of whales, they have blowholes and they look like eyes. They sometimes are ovoid, aren't they? Or is that in that fin thing, right?
The blowhole, one of the, I learned a lot of my designing from Bill Reed, and one of the touchy points between Bill Reed and I was, he always felt that you had to include all the parts of the design in the piece. I won't dwell too much on him, he's not here to defend himself. But I always felt that it's okay to leave parts out. So I don't have a blowhole on there.
Because sometimes I look and it's like a mystery because you don't know if it's an eye or, I mean, they sometimes look like eyes.
Sometimes there's a face there and the mouth is the blowhole.
Oh.
These are experiments. This is an experiment. I carved them separately, and when it was all finished, I put them together, and one was a little bit off the other. So that's why I called it relaxed symmetry. So basically what I'm doing is playing with the negative and the positive. It's really like how these lines connect with other lines and why they connect. And it's really up to the viewer on how you want to see it. This one was designed to go horizontal, but the installers like it this way. No, I like it the way it is. This I call split U. It's a play on the split U that I talked about. Here's the split here, the thin line separating the two faces. You'll see the face echoed in other paintings. This sculpture here. This is actually a portrait of my wife, who's a Gemini. There's two of her. And she loved the color green and loved the color yellow, so I'll give her credit for influencing me to do more yellows. Some people ask me how do I arrive on colors. It's really a matter of looking at the image and seeing how the color could work. I don't really have a fixed formula on how I choose color. The long ovoid in the nostril, mouth. And this one here, I call it numbstone, which means 2 equals 1. And it's also a name of a chief. He was such a great chief that he was regarded as being equal to 2. But this has nothing to do with the chief. This, I got the idea, I really liked it, and I was playing with which side I should use the black and the red. And when I was experimenting with his little small drawings, I put them together, and I really loved what happened. It wasn't a planned painting. Yes?
So you do the image first and then the color comes after?
Yeah, sometimes I have the idea, sometimes I'll get the idea, and then I'll play with the color.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with, like I'm a really experimenting with color beyond red and black. I'm right now producing a card that has tinfoil, like it's the tinfoil for color. And I think it was last week I was watching a fashion show and they said that the end thing for next year will be tinfoil.
You started a trend.
I don't know, maybe we're working together. Any thoughts? Anybody?
About the sculptures.
Who owns them? Oh, the sculptures? The metal sculptures in the middle and at the entrance, and you'll see one in the other room. I've been doing a lot of blanket designs for my grandmother and aunties and anybody else, other people, and I've done a lot of templates. And so a friend of mine, he did a beautiful cutout of stainless steel, a beautiful design, 1 inch thick. And I was so amazed on how he achieved it. He hired a water jet, a person who did water jet cutouts. And I loved the effect that he got. So I from the templates that I do, I started to experiment with this. So the raven is the first piece that I've done. The median at the center, outside is the second. And what's in there is, I think, about a fifth cutout. And that is, it's a really thin nozzle, high pressure water that shoots out of this machine and is computer generated. So the lines are entered into the computer, like my lines are entered into there, and then that's the end product.
Any particular reason you chose the color green? No.
Any particular reason why I chose the green? The other color I forgot to mention is green. It's very sparingly used at contact because it was harder to obtain. And the green, there's different school of thought of where it came from. One thought is it came from the oxide of copper, and the other is it came from clay found in certain places. There's one special place where it's found on the northern part of Paraguay. And green is used quite often more in the secondary, like where the white is, that's where the green would be used.
Could you tell us more about the process? Do you start with pencil drawing like paper? Do you start with a gesture? Could you tell us more?
I have a doodle book, like I doodle in there, and sometimes, right now I've designed about 4 or 5 pairs of earrings, and I'll doodle in it, and some of the shapes I enjoy, I'm really enjoying, so I've done the earrings, but now I want to blow them up into a painting. I really like the shape. And once, for these larger paintings, I will do a small drawing and project it on an opaque projector on a larger piece of paper, the same size as the canvas, and cut a template. Okay, I'll do one more painting before I go. The painting there, the black, red, black on white with the red cross hatching, I call it Kuganjut Didi, the child of Kuganjut. When I first started to experiment with this new excitement I have for hot art, that was one of the experiments. And when I finished it, I didn't like it, so I put it in the drawer. And when Karen Dufek and Bill McLennan came out to my studio to look at the paintings, to talk about this show, I showed them the painting, and I was quite pleased that it fit the category of what I was already doing 20 years later. And the other in the corner, the one with the slant, I've had many discussions with Karen about titles. This one, I had no title for it, and she suggested if I didn't title it, she would title it. Because sometimes my titles were kind of crazy compared to hers. So I settled on Untitled. Not very original. And when I did the print, we are working on title now for Haida Gwaii, and I retitled the print. Now I call it Entitlement. Okay, we'll go in the other room. A lot of the art on storage boxes, protocols, masks, and so on, there's a lot of symmetry. The drum here, you'll see symmetry. And I started to get I didn't really enjoy doing symmetry. Came to a point where I wanted to move beyond it. So I had this idea for about a year before 9/11. The Sea Monster, and my title for it was Looking at Asymmetry. Samos is a sea monster that my ancestors feared the most when they were traveling, because it was like a dead end, and it could come out of the water at any time without warning and overturn the canoe. So Samos is a feared creature by the travelers. And when 9/11 happened, I, like many other millions of people, I happened to have the TV on, and I couldn't believe what I saw. And a few days later, I was thinking it would be really neat if we could find another solution other than retaliation. And I was thinking, holding my breath and thinking that maybe there will be no retaliation. And no retaliation makes it asymmetrical. And retaliation makes it symmetrical. And to balance this image, I created another one over there called Are You Ready for the New Light? The new light was awareness of another solution. This sculpture here, I call it ravenous. Many of our stories, Raven is always eating. He's always eating something. He's always stealing food. So he's ravenous. And in this story, Raven shows up in the form of a baby in this village. Raven is flying over the water. Pardon me, there's another prelude to that. Raven is flying over the water, and he sees a reef, his favorite reef. He thought he'd go and rest there, but when he came to the reef, there were all the supernatural beings were floating around it. They were having their own rest. And the stronger supernatural beings were on the reef, and the weaker ones were floating on the water. And so Raven looked up in the sky, and he saw a village up there. So he bit into the sky, and as he bit into the sky, he entered into the village, and he saw the chief's daughter was just giving birth, so he came in as the chief's daughter's baby. And at night, because he was Raven, because they didn't give him enough food, because he was a child, he would walk through the village he came in. There were 5 rows of houses. And the first night, he ate 1 eyeball out of each person's head. And took it home. He did buy it, he took it. And so he ended up with a basket full of eyeballs. And he would laugh. He was laughing because he put it in the fire and they popped. And every time it popped, they laughed. Very graphic. And after he warmed it up, he would eat it. And this happened for 4 days. So 4 rows of houses. People in the village were getting kind of concerned. What's going on? Everybody was walking around with 1 eye. And this story puzzled me for a long time. And right now we're in conflict with the logging company on how much logging is happening on Haida Gwaii. And then I started thinking, okay, we are ravenous. When we cover our eye, we have no depth of field. So we need to find our other eye and refocus on what we are doing.
What is your name in your language?
Haute Sunglans
Sunglass.
means eagle of the dawn. And I got it from my uncle. We normally receive our names from our aunties or our uncles or our grandfathers on our mother's side and grandmother on our mother's side. We're matrilineal. We follow our mothers. We inherit all our crests, songs, dances through our mothers. And each one of us come from a clan. In Masset, I think there are 13 or 15 clans that survived the contact in Skidegate. There are 2 main Haida villagers on Haida Gwaii, Skidegate and Masset. And we lost something like maybe 50 to 60% of the clans.
There's a question.
Last night at the opening, you talked a bit about the missing link and the elders and grandparents, how important it was for rediscovering your art. Can you explain that a bit? Because I think it was very meaningful for your art.
We had a challenge in childhood. There was always a challenge to us. I now see it as a challenge. And when I was a child at that age, I thought it was ridicule. But now I see it as a challenge. When my parents were children and taken away to the residential schools, some of them never came home for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, 12 years. And when they came home, they lost many of them lost their ability to speak their own language. They came home speaking English. And my parents are the generation that took the brunt of that treatment. And so because what my grandmother told me was, I didn't want you people to go through the same experience, so we never spoke Haida to you. So my generation, there are some people working to learn the language, and right now there must be over 100 people who are doing the art. So there's a strong resurgence to reconnecting with cultural knowledge through the arts and through the song and dance. I don't say this in a mean way. I think it's just part of our journey to, and in our language we say, Gudangant Tatsgadao, make your mind strong. So this experience is helping us to, and doing the art is helping us to make our minds strong. When we have a strong mind, then we can be the pillar in any storm.
To follow up, when you were talking about process, how you design something, then you'll put it on an overhead, sketch it on paper, and then you'd put that piece of paper, which is a template, let's say if we're talking about this piece, you put it on so you know where you're painting each color and design? Is that how it works?
Yeah, what I will do is I'll cut the template. If I'm not happy with it, I'll trace it onto a new piece of paper and refine it again. And then I'll put it on paper. And when I'm painting it on the paper, I'm still refining it.
And then do you put that paper on the canvas?
Yeah. The template?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll use a template on this also. And there is a certain mathematical equation in the art, but I don't know what it is. I'm sure a mathematician can take all the measurements, and there's a certain proportion that's pleasing to the eye, and I think that is intuitive. I think each one of us has an intuition to appreciate proportion. For men, it's women. For women, it's shoes.
Sorry, there was a question over there.
Well, you mentioned Bill Reed, but I wonder if there are other native artists, perhaps earlier than Reed, that were particularly meaningful for you or helpful to you.
Yes, there was only a handful of artists in Masset. I can name almost all of them, and only a handful in Skidegate. When I first started to be interested in the art, I think there were no more than 10 in Masset and no more than 10 in Skidegate, but they weren't doing it full time. The main livelihood would be building boats or fishing or logging. And off Haida Gwaii in the lower mainland, there were people like Mungo Martin, Doug Cranmer, in Seattle, a very famous art historian, Bill Holm, who did a beautiful analysis of the art form. There were, but I'm talking about the 60s and 50s. And about the 1970s, there was a definite increase in the amount of people who were doing art.
Were not all the totem poles removed until 1968? So there's no totem poles in Haida Gwaii, they were all...
It wasn't a one-shot deal. There are some stories where some of the Haida people were hired to chop down the totem poles, and they were actually bucked up into firewood. And some others were taken away to museums. and some others were left to rot. And the people were discouraged to practice any art or any ceremony until I think about 1953, the potlatch was reinstated. But I think around 1880, there was a law banning the potlatch, which was our Supreme Court, and which also enabled us to keep our ceremonies going and validating our laws.
There was one.
Sure.
I don't have time for the
Okay.
minutes. There's one question over there.
Actually, I've got two and I can't make up my mind.
Just pick, yeah, just try.
Where's the name Davidson from? And the other question is the drums, is it ever get played?
Good question. Where does the name Davidson come from? In 1880, there was a mass baptismal. The first missionary came into Mass in 1876, Harrison. It took him about 4 years to learn the language and also to convince people that they should have English names. So many of the people received, their first name was English and their Haida name was their surname. And the next generation, for example, my grandfather, his name was Robert. His father, his name was Naslan. And his father's English name was David. And so Chinny, his surname became Davidson. And many of the other names in Masset are like that. For example, the town chief, Willie Matthews, his father's name was Matthew. So when Willie was born, he became Willie Matthews. And these drums do get played. These are all functional drums. One more.
When did your parents go to residential school?
I'm not sure what age my dad went, or my mother, but they were children when they left. And I think my dad only went up to grade 8.
Which year was that, roughly?
He was born in 1924, so it would be the 30s.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Davidson for being here today and talking with us. You all don't know, but I've had him talking already for another hour today. It's a great note to end on the drums. Actually, just again to remind you, we have the Rainbow Creek Dancers performing tomorrow in our auditorium at 2 p.m. Mr. Davidson and his brother Reg, amongst with their colleagues, will be performing. Arrive early, we'll line up, and doors will open at 1:30. It's a free event.
Thank you.